The sharp antiseptic sting in the air hit her first, before the pain, before the memories could stitch themselves back together. Cold fluorescent lights hummed above as she blinked, her eyelids heavy, the world slow and muffled like cotton stuffed in her ears. The white ceiling blurred and swam above her, and for a fleeting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then came the pain, a searing, pulsing ache in her side, deep and raw, like something essential had been ripped away. And it had. Her hand moved weakly to her abdomen, fingers trembling against the coarse hospital gown. Gauze, tape, dull heat beneath skin. Realization clawed its way to the surface. She tried to lift her head, but a wave of nausea forced it back onto the pillow. Her throat was dry, tongue like sandpaper. Machines beeped quietly around her, rhythmic and indifferent. She turned her head, sluggish and slow. The chair beside the bed was empty. No coat draped over the back. No duffel bag. No sneakers kicked carelessly under the table, like they always were when he stayed the night. James! Her voice came out cracked, barely audible. A nurse passing by paused in the doorway, middle-aged with tired but kind eyes. "You're awake," she said gently, walking in and checking the monitors. "You've been out a few hours. That's normal, sweetie. Just let your body rest." "Where's my son?" she asked, trying again, a little louder, but panic already threading its way through her voice. "James. He was supposed to be here." The nurse hesitated. Not long, but long enough. She smoothed the blanket, her gaze avoiding hers. "He left a while ago." The words landed like a brick to the chest. Her breath caught. "What do you mean? He left? When?" "I'm not sure exactly. Maybe around noon? It's almost 5 now. He said he had to take care of something." The nurse looked at her then, brows furrowing. "He didn't tell you?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. No, he hadn't. He'd held her hand before the surgery, hadn't he? Told her she was the only person in the world who'd ever really loved him. That he was sorry. That he'd never ask for anything ever again. His eyes had been bloodshot from crying. She remembered because she'd cupped his face and kissed his forehead like she had when he was little, like he was still that soft, scared boy who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. And then she went under, and now he was gone. Gone. She tried to sit up again, and this time the pain made her gasp aloud. The nurse caught her shoulder, gently easing her back down. Hey, don't rush it. You had major surgery. Let's keep you still for now, all right?" Tears pricked her eyes, not from the pain, but from something deeper, hotter. The kind of ache you couldn't point to on an x-ray. "He wouldn't just leave me," she said, more to herself than to the nurse. "He wouldn't. I'm sure he'll be back soon." The nurse's voice was soft, rehearsed. She'd said it before, to other women with hopeful eyes. But her kindness only made it worse. "He didn't take my phone, did he? It's in the drawer." The nurse gestured to the small table. "Do you want me to get it for you?" She nodded, swallowing against the lump in her throat. The nurse handed her the phone carefully, and she clutched it like a lifeline. Her fingers fumbled over the screen, unlocking it through the fog of pain and meds. No new messages. No missed calls. She tapped on James's name. The last message he'd sent was from the night before the surgery. "I love you." "Thank you, Mom. I swear I'll make it right." She called him. Straight to voicemail. She stared at the screen, willing it to ring. Willing his name to appear, to buzz and say James is calling. But it didn't. She tried again, and again. Each time, the call dropped into the same cold, automated void. "The person you are trying to reach is unavailable." Her heart pounded beneath the thin hospital blanket, each beat louder than the last. A nurse outside laughed at something, a distant sound like static. She couldn't hear anything else. Couldn't feel anything but the weight pressing down on her chest. She had sold her kidney. For him. For the debt he swore would kill him if they didn't pay it. For the men who pounded on their door at night. For the broken nose he'd come home with, bruises he tried to hide. For the shame in his voice when he whispered, "I messed up, Mom. I messed up bad." She had begged the doctor to clear her for surgery, even though she was borderline anemic. Had lied about her blood pressure. Had looked that surgeon in the eye and said, "Do it. I don't care what it costs." Because she couldn't lose him. She couldn't bury her son. And now he had left. Her hand curled around the phone so tight her fingers hurt. Blood pounded in her ears. She wanted to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. Instead, the tears spilled silently down her cheeks, soaking into the pillow beneath her head. He was gone, and deep down, beneath the horror and the heartbreak, another feeling stirred. Something colder, heavier, not confusion, not sadness, a beginning. Because if he'd truly done this, if he had really taken her sacrifice and disappeared without a word, then he had no idea what she was capable of. Not yet. The scent of powdered formula and warm blankets came back to her first, not as memories, but as feelings in her body, instincts carved into bone. That first winter after James was born, she'd sleep sitting up in the threadbare recliner with him against her chest, swaddled and sniffling, his little breaths puffing against her neck. She'd rock him for hours, afraid to move too fast, afraid he'd wake and scream from colic. She was only 19, just a girl herself. No savings, no partner, just a baby who needed her, and the sound of snow hitting the window like soft sand in the dark. The apartment then had been little more than a glorified closet. One bedroom, if you could call it that. Drafty windows and a faucet that always dripped. But she'd hung glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and painted the nursery corner a soft yellow using the cheapest she could find at the hardware store. She hadn't cared about the mildew in the bathroom, or the neighbors fighting through paper-thin walls. Her world had been swaddled in flannel onesies, and lullabies hummed over microwave dinners. It was hard, yes, but she was never afraid of hard. She knew how to work. She'd taken the night shift at the gas station 6 weeks after giving birth, breastfeeding on breaks. Her feet blistered from standing. She worked holidays, birthdays, storms. Sleep became a luxury she rationed. She remembered once watching the sunrise while cleaning spilled nacho cheese off the floor and realizing she hadn't sat down in nearly 12 hours. But there was no one else. Just her and James. And he was always worth it. She used to put a few extra cereal bars in her coat pocket when she walked him to school, pretending she wasn't hungry even when her stomach growled loud enough to make him glance back. "I'm fine, sweetie," she'd say with a smile. "I'll eat later." Later often meant never. Later was when the rent was paid, the electric bill covered, and James had lunch money and clean clothes that still fit. She remembered his 3rd birthday party, how she stayed up until 2 a.m. making a homemade dinosaur cake from a box mix, shaping it with a bread knife and green frosting she dyed with food coloring. The plastic figurines had come from a dollar store. She'd invited 2 of the neighbor kids and their moms. He was so happy. Ran around the apartment in his new light-up sneakers, roaring like a T-Rex. He didn't see the way she had counted every coin at the register to buy those candles. He never knew she'd eaten toast for dinner 3 nights that week. As he grew, so did his dreams, and she tried to give him all of them. When he turned 16, he wanted a car. She didn't say no. She said, "Let me see what I can do." And she picked up weekend cleaning jobs on top of her hospital shifts, scrubbing other people's baseboards, mopping linoleum until her knuckles ached. The car wasn't fancy. It stalled on cold mornings and had a cracked windshield, but he drove it to school beaming. She remembered that look. Pride and freedom. She'd chased that look for years. When college came, he wanted to go out of state. Far away. She didn't beg him to stay, even though her heart felt like it was being peeled from her chest. Instead, she got a second job at a diner and applied for every grant, every loan, every scholarship. She watched YouTube videos to learn how to fill out FAFSA forms, spent nights poring over bank statements, scraping together whatever she could. The financial aid officer had said, "You're just above the bracket for full aid, ma'am." As if she didn't already know. As if being a few dollars above the line meant she wasn't barely hanging on. She sent him anyway. When his grades slipped that first year, she didn't yell. She sent care packages instead, snacks, socks, handwritten notes telling him he was smart. He could do this. She believed in him. When he crashed the car during spring break and called her at 2 a.m., drunk and panicked, she didn't scream. She wired the money. "Just promise me you'll be more careful," she'd whispered, chest tight, voice trembling. He promised. So many promises. He was a good kid once. Tender, even. He'd pick her daisies from the edge of the parking lot and leave them on the kitchen counter in a plastic cup. He'd tuck notes in her apron pocket that said, "Love you, Mommy." She kept them in a shoebox under her bed, each one folded with the care of a child who thought his mom could do anything. And maybe she could, once. But the years had a way of wearing a person down. The little things started adding up, lies about money, shady friends, mood swings she couldn't understand. When the loan sharks came around the first time, he swore it was a misunderstanding. Just a friend I owed. He's just being dramatic. But then came the bruises, the threats, the voicemail she hadn't meant to overhear where someone warned him, "Pay up or we find your mama." She didn't ask questions after that. She just acted. Because when the world wanted to take something from him, she stood between them. That was her job. Always had been. When he cried in her arms like he was 5 again, she felt that old instinct rise up in her. The urge to protect, to fix, to sacrifice. She didn't think twice. She didn't care about the risk. She looked the doctor dead in the eye and said, "I'll do it." She sold the only thing she had left to give. And now he was gone. No note, no text, no goodbye. Just silence. Empty. Cruel. And still, some part of her wanted to believe this was all a mistake. That he was in trouble. That he needed more time. That the boy who used to kiss her cheek and say, "You're my whole world, Mom," couldn't have turned his back like this. But another part, the one hardened by years of scraping by, of cleaning other people's messes, knew better. She had given him everything. And maybe that was the problem. The cab dropped her off at the curb, the engine rumbling a moment too long before pulling away, as if even the driver knew something wasn't right. The house looked the same on the outside, the chipped paint on the front step, the faded wreath on the door, the small crack in the lower left window pane. She gripped the railing as she climbed the porch stairs, her sides still sore, muscles trembling under the weight of post-surgical exhaustion. The doctor had advised against being alone this soon, but she didn't have anyone else. No one she could call. Not anymore. Her key slid into the lock, but the knob didn't turn. She frowned, tried again. Jammed. She twisted harder. On the third try, it gave, but barely. Inside, the air felt wrong. Too still. Too empty. "James!" she called, stepping in slowly. Silence answered. The living room was bare. Not entirely, but noticeably. The throw pillows were gone. So was the game console. His favorite hoodie, the one always draped across the couch no matter how many times she folded it, wasn't there. She moved further in, her breath catching in her throat. The TV was missing. The corner shelf with the photo of him from 8th grade gone. Just the faint imprint of dust where it used to be. Panic bloomed in her chest. She hobbled down the hall, one hand bracing the wall for support. The door to his bedroom hung open, slightly ajar like he'd left in a hurry. She pushed it gently. The room was stripped. Drawers open and empty. No clothes. No shoes. The mattress was bare, the sheets crumpled in a pile like dirty laundry no one had bothered to take. The closet doors yawned wide, vacant. His posters were torn from the wall. Nothing remained but the outline of where his dresser used to be, and a small, cracked plug outlet dangling by a single screw. Her knees buckled. She sat down hard on the edge of the stripped bed, ignoring the pain in her side. It wasn't possible. He couldn't have just left. He wouldn't. She stood shakily and made her way to the kitchen, opening drawers, rifling through the junk basket they kept near the microwave. Her emergency cash gone. Every last bill. She opened the cabinet above the fridge. The old coffee tin where she hid the jewelry her mother had left her. Her grandmother's cross. A pair of sapphire earrings, the tiny silver locket she'd worn on her wedding day, all gone. The tin was empty. Her hands trembled as she sank into the nearest chair. It creaked beneath her weight. Her side throbbed, but it didn't matter. Nothing did. The ache was too big now, too wide to fit inside her body. It was one thing to vanish. But this was a looting. A gutting. A clean sweep. The envelope with her life savings was gone, too. She kept it tucked in a manila folder behind the washing machine. Rainy day money, slowly built over years of side gigs and missed meals. He knew it was there. She told him once, after a scare with the power bill. In case of emergency, she'd said. Apparently, he'd agreed. She opened the bathroom door to steady herself, splashed water on her face, then gripped the sink to breathe. That's when she noticed it. The deed folder. The one for the house, her house, which she had inherited from her aunt, tucked into a top drawer behind yellowing receipts and expired coupons. Gone. Heart in her throat. She fumbled through the drawer, every breath sharp. Nothing. She yanked open the hallway cabinet. Her mortgage paperwork, property tax files, all of it gone. Her phone buzzed.
It was a text. From Alicia, a neighbor from 3 doors down. So sorry to hear about James leaving. Heard he moved in with that girl from Crestview? Wild. Hope you're okay. Her vision blurred. Moved in with someone?
When? How?
She stared at the screen, thumbs hovering. She didn't know what to say.
Didn't even know what to ask.
The text wasn't even the worst of it. What came next was. Later that night, when the pain and shock were still raw, she sat curled on the couch with an old blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her phone clutched tight. She searched his name online, out of desperation, not because she expected anything useful, just anything. She landed on his social media. A photo posted just hours earlier. James grinning. Arms slung around a girl with too much highlighter and a fake tan. Fresh start. No more guilt tripping. No more drama. Just peace. The caption underneath hit like a slap. Can't be around people who manipulate you by sacrificing for you. That's not love. That's control. The comments made it worse. You're so brave for walking away from toxicity. She gave you her kidney, and now she wants to own you? Hard pass. Mommy issues are real. The blood drained from her face. She read the post 3 times, then once more just to be sure. Her heart beat like a slow drum in her ears. She couldn't cry. The tears had already dried into something colder. Numbness settled over her shoulders like a weighted cloak. He hadn't just left. He'd rewritten the story. He'd made her out to be a villain. And for what? For helping him? For trying to save his life? She didn't sleep that night. Just sat in the dark, surrounded by the ghosts of what used to be her life. Every corner of the house whispered with memories, his baby blanket still folded in the linen closet, a sock she'd missed beneath the couch, the faint outline of his handprint on the bathroom mirror from last week. It had all been real. And now it was gone. She didn't rage. Not yet. Rage was hot, fast, alive. What she felt was colder. A stillness like the moment after a crash, when the world goes quiet and you're not sure if you're alive or already fading. For 2 days, she didn't speak to anyone. Barely ate. Just drifted through the empty house, nursing the pain in her body and the deeper wound in her soul. Friends texted, but she couldn't answer. What would she even say? That her son, the child she'd spent 2 decades loving, had gutted her home and her heart in one clean sweep?
No.
She stayed silent, because in that silence, something was shifting. Something she couldn't name yet, only feel. The birthday cake was store-bought. She hadn't even planned on getting one. She only picked it up because the woman at the grocery store bakery asked if she wanted candles with it, and the question startled her. It took her a moment to register what day it was. June 14th. Her birthday. She'd forgotten. The cake was too sweet, the frosting thick and artificial, clinging to the roof of her mouth like paste. She didn't bother with plates or candles. Just took a slice out with a butter knife, sat at the edge of the kitchen table, and stared at the ticking clock on the wall. She chewed without tasting, swallowed without feeling. The house echoed around her, empty and still, as though it, too, had forgotten what this day once meant. Years ago, James used to wake her up with breakfast in bed. Burnt toast, watery orange juice, and sometimes cereal with way too much milk. He'd sing off-key and give her crayon drawings wrapped in notebook paper. You're the best mommy in the world. She still had a few of those notes in the back of her dresser drawer. She hadn't looked at them in weeks. Couldn't. The phone stayed quiet all morning. By noon, she started checking the signal. Turned it off and on again. Opened apps. Scrolled through old messages just to see her name somewhere, anywhere, even if it was attached to pain. By 4, it was undeniable. No one was calling. No one was coming. She opened Facebook out of habit and found herself scrolling through everyone else's lives. Smiling selfies, beach vacations, baby showers, engagement announcements. Her stomach twisted, not with jealousy, but with a kind of aching displacement. Like she'd been quietly erased from the world while she wasn't paying attention. The last message from her sister had been nearly 2 weeks ago.
Short. Cold.
I think it's best you give James some space. You're coming off intense. She hadn't replied. What was there to say? That the boy she gave her body and blood to had painted her as unstable? That she'd been begging for space for years, the space to rest, to breathe, to be human, and now she was drowning in it? Even her cousin, who used to call every other week, had gone quiet. She'd reached out once, early on, confused and cautious. I heard what happened. Are you okay? But that conversation had quickly turned. Maybe you were too involved, the cousin said gently. He's an adult now. You've got to let go. You gave him everything. Maybe that's part of the problem. That word again, everything. As if love could be measured in liters and not lifetimes. She glanced at her contact list. Names blurred together. Some had already stopped responding. Others sent polite, distant replies. Hope you're well. Thinking of you. None of them called. None asked her to explain. They'd already heard the story, James's version. She could imagine how he told it. Calm, confident, self-possessed. She just couldn't let go. She made me feel guilty all the time. She offered to donate the kidney. I never asked. And now she uses it against me like I owe her something. The words stung even in her imagination. She once believed her love could shelter him from anything. She'd built her life around that belief. Now it was a weapon he'd turned on her, and everyone else believed it. Obsessed. That's what Alicia had said, carefully, hesitantly, after one awkward run-in at the grocery store. I just think maybe you were always too focused on him, you know? Like your whole life was James. That's not healthy. As if she hadn't done what every mother does. Sacrifice, spend, stretch until there's nothing left but muscle memory and worry. As if being too focused on your child was some kind of mental illness, not the default setting for a woman raising a son alone. But now, that focus had become the crime. She'd tried to reach out to a few old friends. Left voicemails. Tentative messages. The responses were slow. Measured. Kind on the surface, but laced with distance. One friend said she didn't want to take sides. Another suggested therapy. One never replied at all. No one said what they were really thinking, that they believed him, that they thought she was broken, that maybe she always had been.
She didn't cry. Not today.
She'd done that already, cried until her ribs ached and her throat felt scraped raw. But this was different. Not grief. Not fury. This was emptiness. A hollowing out. She sat in the living room as the sun dipped low outside the windows. Shadows climbed the walls like vines. The silence was so complete it felt physical, pressing against her skin, wrapping around her like a second layer. No one knocked. No one texted. Not a single candle flickered. Not a single voice sang her name. She was alone.
Not in the casual, busy life kind of way, but in the irreversible, almost mythic kind of alone. The kind that made you question if you'd ever truly been seen at all. The TV stayed off. The lights dimmed as night settled. She left the cake half-eaten on the kitchen table, the edges of the frosting beginning to harden. She didn't clean it up. There was no one to clean it for. No one to impress. No one to reassure. She climbed into bed fully dressed, limbs heavy. The sheets still smelled faintly of the lavender detergent she used when James was little, a smell that once comforted her. Now, it clung to her like an accusation. She stared at the ceiling, watching shadows flicker from passing headlights. The same ceiling she used to lie under, praying for rent extensions, counting coins, whispering lullabies to a baby pressed against her chest. All those nights where her love burned like a furnace, keeping them both alive. Now there was no heat, just ash and silence. She was digging through the hall closet for a flashlight when she found it. An old, cracked leather folder wedged behind a stack of moldy paperbacks and forgotten winter scarves. It had likely slipped down behind the shelf years ago, during one of her cleaning frenzies. She almost missed it entirely, but something about the way it felt in her hand, solid, heavy with time, made her pause. She carried it to the kitchen, brushed off the dust, and opened it with the reverence of someone exhuming a time capsule. Inside, there were documents yellowed with age, a faint scent of cedar and ink rising up from the pages. Her breath caught when she saw the letterhead, Whitmore and Lane Legal Services. She remembered now. The lawyer her husband had seen before he passed. She hadn't thought of that man in over a decade. She pulled the pages out carefully. At the top, in her husband's neat, blocky handwriting, was her name. Hers, not James's. It was a life insurance policy. Not the one she'd already cashed out to keep their house years ago. This was separate. Smaller, tucked away, nearly forgotten in the chaos after his death. Her name was listed as the sole beneficiary. It hadn't been much then, but with the interest over time, the figure was larger now. Not life-changing, but enough to breathe. Enough to matter. She blinked at the number. Enough to start over. Tucked behind the policy was something else. A notarized copy of a property deed. Not to the house she lived in, the one James had gutted and left behind. This was for a small parcel of land upstate, a stretch of forested acreage her husband had inherited but never developed. He used to talk about building a cabin there, once, before the cancer came. She'd brushed it off as fantasy, but here it was, real, signed, undiscovered by James, a fact that felt suddenly precious, sacred. She stared at the documents, her fingers trembling, and for the first time in weeks, something other than pain filled her chest. Power. She had something left. Something he hadn't stolen. A corner of the world with her name on it, untouched by lies, betrayal, or the bleeding wound of motherhood turned against her. He hadn't known. That mattered more than anything. She sat with the folder in her lap for a long time, the weight of it grounding her. The house was still cold, the silence still pressing in around her, but now there was a thread of something running beneath it. A current, a pulse. She wasn't hollow anymore. She was simmering. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with the old lamp casting a warm circle of light over the wood grain, sipping tea and rereading the documents again and again. She even found the number for Whitmore and Lane, surprised to see they still existed. She scribbled it down in the margin of a notepad, then circled it. Twice. By morning, she had a plan. She made the appointment without telling anyone. The secretary on the phone was polite, professional. When she walked into the office 2 days later, dressed in a coat she hadn't worn since before James started high school, she felt invisible and sharp all at once. Like the world had forgotten her, but she remembered herself. Every step down the hall to that lawyer's office was a reclamation. The man who greeted her was younger than she expected. Not the same lawyer, of course. This one was his son, he explained. He'd taken over the family business. She handed him the folder with quiet ceremony and sat back as he read through the documents with growing interest. This policy is still valid, he confirmed. And with the interest, well, you're sitting on a decent chunk. Not millions, but enough to do something meaningful. She nodded, quiet. She didn't need millions. And this deed, he continued, tapping the second page, you legally own this land outright. No liens, no claims. It's untouched. This is a clean asset. Clean. The word echoed in her mind. She asked him a few questions about selling the land or developing it, what she could do with it, who she'd need to talk to. He explained everything patiently, professionally, but with a flicker of something else in his voice. Respect, not pity, not condescension. You've got options, he said, finally. You've got leverage. She walked out of that office taller than she'd stood in months. The city felt different on her skin that afternoon. Sharper, brighter, less oppressive. Even the wind felt like it had shifted, brushing against her cheeks like a benediction. She stopped by a bookstore and bought a journal. A real one. Hardback. She hadn't written anything just for herself in years. She spent the evening outlining her possibilities. Not fantasies. Not desperate prayers. Concrete options. The land could be sold to a developer, She'd already looked up the zoning regulations. Or she could hold it. Build something. A retreat. A rental cabin. A safe house, maybe for women like her. Women who'd given everything and been left for dead. The money from the insurance could cover initial costs. And once she had the land appraised, who knew? For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving. She was building. James didn't know about any of it. That was the most satisfying part. All his lies, his schemes, his smug little captions and veiled jabs, they meant nothing now. He'd thought he'd taken everything. He was wrong. She folded the documents into a new folder that night, labeled it Resurgence, then slid it into the drawer beside her bed, beneath her grandmother's Bible. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She breathed, and in that breath was steel. She didn't announce anything. There were no declarations, no dramatic confrontations. She moved like water, steady and quiet, reshaping the world around her without making a sound. Every morning she rose before the sun, sat at the kitchen table with her tea, and worked in silence. The soft tick of the clock was the only witness to what she was becoming. Her first step was to consolidate what was hers. She closed the old joint bank account James still had access to, the one he had drained while she was recovering in the hospital. She opened a new account under her maiden name, tied to a local credit union that didn't send flashy mailers or share customer data easily. The insurance money went there. The land deed stayed in her fireproof lockbox, along with her new will, freshly signed and witnessed, naming no heirs. She updated her medical directive next, removed James as her emergency contact, listed no one in his place. She was done giving pieces of herself away like free samples. Her debts were next. Some had been quietly growing. Credit cards she'd used to pay off his late-night gambling debts, personal loans for bills he'd promised to pay back. One by one, she closed them, paid them off with icy precision. Every payment she made felt like a stone lifted from her chest, not because it bought her freedom, but because it cut away his leverage. She began documenting everything. Names, dates, screenshots, copies of transactions, a timeline of his disappearances, the stories he told mutual friends, the things he'd taken, emotionally, financially, even legally. Her lawyer helped her file a quiet petition to restrict any future claims to her estate. She left no loopholes, no misunderstandings. She kept receipts for everything. In the evenings, when the house was still and she didn't have the energy to type, she would light a candle, open her notebook, and write in longhand. Not journal entries, plans, scripts, ideas, small phrases of power she repeated to herself. I don't need to be loud to be heard. I don't need to be seen to make an impact. He will never know what hit him. He was still partying, still smiling in photos posted by other people. Always other people, never from his own account. He'd grown cautious, probably suspected she might be watching, but he couldn't resist the attention. There were pictures of him at clubs, arms around new girls, hashtags like hashtag fresh start and hashtag no more drama under filtered photos of cocktails and neon lights. He hadn't changed. He had only gotten sloppier in his victories. He was still using her last name, still bragging about the kidney like it was a funny anecdote. She offered it. Someone quoted him as saying once, their tone implying disbelief. She's just bitter now. Mums, man. So dramatic. He was still telling people she was unstable, that she fabricated drama, that she was obsessed. She let him talk. Instead of defending herself, she sent a quiet, anonymous tip to the IRS about income he hadn't reported. Not revenge, just order, balance. She let the system do the work. Not because she trusted it, but because she knew how to use it now. She understood the forms, understood timing, knew when to call, who to email, what words to use so she didn't sound like a scorned mother, but like a citizen protecting her assets. And always, she stayed quiet. She didn't tell anyone about the lawyer meetings, didn't post cryptic quotes or revenge fantasies. She moved like a shadow slipping through the cracks. Her neighbors thought she was recovering. Her sister thought she'd let it go. Her friends, the few still lingering at the edge of her life, assumed she'd accepted what had happened. But she hadn't. She was just preparing. She sold the land eventually, Not to the highest bidder, but to a female-owned nonprofit that built trauma recovery retreats. She negotiated the sale herself, and though the offer was slightly lower than market value, she accepted it with peace. She didn't need to wring every cent from it. She needed to repurpose it, make it clean. The check cleared, the funds transferred, and that was when she really began. She set up a foundation, registered it under a discreet but elegant name. No hint of her own, no ties to James. She applied for nonprofit status and filed her bylaws, emergency aid for women escaping financial abuse. No advertisements, no press releases, just quiet support, funneled through partnerships with local clinics and social workers. She'd learned how easy it was to be erased when no one believed you. Now, she'd be the one helping others find their footing before the floor disappeared. She rerouted her number through a call screening service, hired a tech to lock down her email, scrub her data from the usual people finder sites. Bit by bit, she faded from view, not because she was running, but because she didn't need to be visible to matter. James, of course, didn't notice. He was still chasing a life he hadn't earned, still leaning on old stories, still using her sacrifice as a punchline at parties where no one knew the full truth, still smiling in pictures, still taking. But the next time he applied for a loan, he'd find his cosigner's credit vanished. The next time he tried to use her address, it would bounce. The next time he needed help, he'd find silence. She didn't block him. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she let his texts rot in purgatory, read, but never answered. She let him feel her absence like a question he couldn't answer. And as her foundation grew, as her debts dissolved, as her breath grew steadier and her steps more deliberate, she realized something. She didn't need to raise her voice to win. She didn't need to scream, or beg, or chase. She had already won. The moment she stopped trying to make him understand and started building a world where his opinion didn't matter. Let him party. Let him lie. She wasn't watching anymore. She was building something permanent, not out of spite, but out of truth, out of survival, out of all the things he never saw in her, but that were always there, waiting. And she didn't need anyone to clap for her, to post about it, or even to know. Because some victories don't echo loudly. Some victories bloom in silence. The letter arrived on a gray Thursday, slipped silently beneath his apartment door like a whisper of winter chill. James barely glanced at it at first, the kind of mail he'd long learned to ignore. Bills, junk, eviction notices. But something about the official seal, the embossed emblem of the law firm she'd once trusted, pricked his attention. He tore it open with careless fingers, expecting routine bureaucracy. Instead, the words hit him like a fist. The inheritance he had boasted about, flaunted at parties, used to buy fleeting luxuries, was revoked. Legally null. The house he claimed as his own, the property he said he'd inherited and remodeled, was never his. The deed, the papers, everything had been signed over to her alone. And now the bank was moving in. Foreclosure proceedings had already been initiated. His name was tied to debts he hadn't been able to pay, and creditors were circling like vultures. It was a legal tsunami he'd never seen coming. His phone started ringing. Calls from the bank's legal department. Angry texts from creditors. Messages from friends who suddenly distanced themselves, their tone cautious, almost pitying. He tried to call her, begged for explanations, claimed innocence. But the line was dead. Calls went unanswered. Texts marked read, but never replied to. And then the rumors began. No longer just whispered between mutual acquaintances, but spoken aloud. That his mother had sold her kidney, not because of some tragic sacrifice, but out of desperation. That she had protected herself legally, cutting him out of her life and assets. That the kidney story was just the surface of a deeper betrayal, a mother who had given everything, only to be discarded like trash. He tried to spin the narrative, said she was unstable, manipulative, obsessed. But the tide had turned. His friends, the ones who once celebrated his reckless charm, now questioned his character. Invitations stopped coming. Doors closed. He was isolated. One evening, desperate and furious, he stormed to her apartment, the place he thought he still owned in spirit if not in law. He banged on the door, screamed her name into the cold night air, demanding answers, demanding respect. She stood in the shadows just beyond the porch light, watching. He called out, voice cracking with rage and desperation, "Mom, please, don't do this. I need you." But she didn't turn. Her silhouette was steady, calm, unyielding. She walked away from the noise, the chaos, the lies. The woman who had once sacrificed everything for a son who vanished without a word had taken it all back. Not with anger, but with quiet power. And as she disappeared down the street, the wind carrying away the echoes of his screams, she knew she was finally free. The phone buzzed relentlessly, lighting up the cracked screen with his name flashing insistently. Call after call, message after message, each one a thread in the web. He desperately tried to weave to pull her back. At first, there was a strange pang, a mix of old love, guilt, and an aching need to explain himself. But as the days wore on and the messages grew more frantic, the pang twisted into something harder. She sat in the quiet of her apartment, her hand hovering over the phone, the weight of the moment pressing down like a storm. The screen glowed with his desperate words, "Please talk to me. I'm sorry, I'll make it right. You don't have to do this." But she didn't pick up. Not once. She had given him everything, the kidney, her trust, her heart. And what had he given her in return? Silence, betrayal, a gaping wound where love should have been. When at last she typed a reply, it was calm and unflinching. A simple truth laid bare. "I gave you everything. You gave me silence." The words hung in the air like a final breath, carrying the weight of every broken promise and shattered hope. She felt the storm inside her begin to settle, the chaos fading into a deep, steady calm. She was no longer the woman shattered by loss. She was whole, forged anew by the fire of betrayal and the strength of survival. And as the days passed, with his calls left unanswered and his apologies unheard, she knew she had finally found her peace. She settled into the rhythm of a quieter life, far from the city's relentless noise and the ghosts that haunted every corner of her old apartment. The small town wasn't much, a cluster of modest homes framed by rolling hills and thick woods, but it had something she hadn't known she needed: space. Space to breathe, to heal, to simply be. Her days were simple. She rose with the sun, opened the windows wide, letting the morning light spill across the worn wooden floors. She started gardening in the small patch of earth behind her new home, dirt under her nails, the smell of fresh soil grounding her in a way that nothing else had. There was a stubborn little plant she brought with her from her old life, one she tried and failed to nurture for years. A small, delicate orchid that refused to bloom no matter how much she watered it or coaxed it with light. But here, in this quiet place, something changed. The orchid began to show signs of life, tiny buds forming where once there had only been fragile leaves. A small miracle she welcomed as a sign of her own resilience. One crisp morning, as she tended to the garden, a neighbor approached with a gentle smile and a steaming cup of coffee. The simple gesture caught her off guard, but it felt like an offering, a bridge to a new kind of connection, one built on kindness rather than obligation. They talked quietly about the weather, the best places to find wildflowers nearby, the slow rhythm of the town. No questions about her past, no assumptions, just the soft hum of companionship. Sipping the coffee, she realized something profound. Her worth had never been tied to who needed her, nor to the sacrifices she'd made. It was tied to those who respected her, who saw her as whole, not broken, as worthy, not burdened. The weight she carried for so long lifted a little more with each passing day, replaced by a steady peace. The silence around her was no longer empty. It was full of possibility. As the orchid finally unfurled its delicate petals, she smiled to herself. Maybe after all the pain and betrayal, she had been growing all along. Quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment to bloom. She sat at the small kitchen table, sunlight filtering softly through the curtains, casting warm patterns across the worn wood. The plate before her was simple, just a modest meal, nothing extravagant, but it was hers. No interruptions, no empty seats pulled away by absence or betrayal. Just the quiet hum of the afternoon settling around her. The silence no longer felt like a cage. It was a sanctuary, a space she had claimed piece by piece from the wreckage of a life once broken. They say you can't choose your family, but you can choose your peace. She took a slow breath, tasting the calm in the air, the steady pulse of her own heartbeat beneath it. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't waiting for someone to come back. She wasn't hoping for apologies or explanations. This time, she ate at her table, alone and free.